Okay, so I'm going to start with a pair of works that led Otto to offer me this exhibition, guided by a simple prompt to explore the relationship between drawing and video in my practice. I liked this drawing, but it wasn't what I would necessarily lead with, if I were to have a studio visit, because it felt less conceptual, more like a kind of raw, personal document of an intense psychic state alluded to by the title, which is Delirium Backslide. And that's been, a good realization with this exhibition is that a curatorial relationship can kind of rescue an approach that I might have prematurely dismissed. How does this drawing relate to video? Well, there's a sense of velocity. It has a kind of shimmering screen-like quality, and there's a suspended event taking place. But beyond how it looks, the drawing process takes place as a series of reactions to chance or contingency. The unpredictability of smeared graphite powder and a few intuitive inaugural marks delimit possibilities for the future of the drawing. And this kind of parallels my tendency to shoot video without a plan in favor of reacting to whatever I come across. The other piece we discussed was Good Attack, a roughly 6-minute video I made in 2021, excerpted here, in which I plot a course through an exotic pet store in Fresh Pond, Queens, filming the fish tanks one by one on my phone before zooming in on a sign behind the counter that reads, Die Terrorist Scum. We slip into a hallucinatory space as the letters of the sign slide and rearrange to read one of three different words depending on which version of the video you catch, meretricious, moisturized, or rotisserie. So in addition to what I said about drawing and video sharing a relationship with contingency, they can also be bridged by animation as a way to touch and intervene in digital media on a more granular level, emphasizing, the art in my hand. This is another illustrative example of a volley between drawing and video. It's a sequence from a video called My Coarsening from 2023, in which a series of drawings is triggered by a barking dog, alternating between figuration and abstraction. It shows a discontinuous subject blinking in and out of existence, intermittently obliterated and reconstituted by symbols and letters. In video, media can be strung together like beads. Hollis Frampton's Zorn's Lemma, which I watched sometime while working on this piece, is a good reference for this idea of kind of appending. I like the different metaphors that people use to describe video. Pipolati Risk describes video as like a handbag, contains different things. I used to just say it was like a basin, and then Flusser describes video as descending from the experience of staring at the surface of a pond, in contrast with film, which descends from looking at flickering fire on a cave wall. I'm gonna take these off. That doesn't make a difference. So one last example, for Thunder Scene, again, I wasn't seeking out a wrecked car because I had, I don't know, something to say about like post-Fordism or something. I was just walking around Queens and, it was just there. The footage I shot on my phone gave way to new problems. The passing cars occluded the subject of the shot. So then I had to remove them one by one, frame by frame, which produced its own artifacts. The carving up of the figure, and the residual headlights and brake lights taking on a kind of spectral presence. So again, you have a piece that kind of comes into being as a series of reactions to happenstance and error. And this is also an indicative work for the show because it's a very succinct piece. This kind of single shot gestural approach that you see throughout Big Casino. When I was working in on these kinds of video gestures for the first time, which was in 2021, 2020, 2021. I was really thinking about these two works by João Maria Gusmão and Pedro Paiva, which I saw at an exhibition at Krebs in like 2018. These short videos on 60 millimeter of a rope uncoiling and a bald spot getting shaved with a straight razor. Um, and then for this show, I was really thinking about Lutz Bacher's ambient videos, which I actually only encountered in print, but you can kind of get the idea, of her filming blue angels over San Francisco, um, birds at dusk, tropical butterflies at the Natural History Museum, and then on the right is a cycle in which she screened multiple of those videos back to back. Okay, so for half a year in 2018, I worked for the Bosnian-born but raised in Croatia illustrator and graphic designer Mirko Ilic. He started off drawing underground comics. Um, I think you would find it funny actually that I'm talking about him right now because we didn't have a he was a not very good boss and I was not a very good employee. But I love the quality of his drawings and he introduced me to the work of one representative of the Zagreb School of Animation, Zlatko Borek. I watched. Let's try to play these. Um, I watched Borek's last animation, which was about the Holocaust, called Wiener Brut, completed in 2014 with Pavel Stauter, another animator, over and over again. And you can kind of see its influence in the figurative elements in my animation, this kind of expressive expression, I guess, kind of superimposed onto a figure. Um, Also here, the dissolution of the figures um, was directly inspired by this work, and then also the cityscapes in another video from 2023 called "Drowsy Kinless" was also inspired by uh, his um, his depiction of a city. So he also showed me, this is the other influence that I got from this. He showed me the Augsburg Book of Miracles, which is a 16th century illuminated manuscript from Germany that depicts cosmic anomalies, mythical monsters, mystical visions, and meteorological catastrophes. Um, so dealing with a couple separate instances of blood cancer while also trying to situate the cosmic imagery in this show, I've returned to this manuscript with a focus on the planetary themes and the motif of raining blood and flesh in the Book of Miracles. I really think these are really beautiful illustrations. The other way I was thinking about the Book of Miracles, and I think it also reflects a kind of ongoing interest in documenting extreme weather that has transformed the landscape of the Bay Area where I'm based. So the previous clips that I played from my 2019 video, Morning in Advance, the haze is actually residual wildfire smoke from the 2018 campfires. And my coarsening, which I've excerpted here, contains footage of a redwood forest burned out and blackened by the 2020 CZU lightning complex fires. So I've made these what I call rotary sequences since 2018. You start by making a custom helmet rig, mounting a tripod on a motorcycle helmet. I started making these in order to film myself looking at things, orbiting the camera from myself, the subject, to the world and back again as I wander throughout the city. Um, Looking at yourself looking is what Sartre described as Baudelaire's innovation, and he writes about it as a sort of tragic mode of consciousness that attenuates one's presence in the world. He writes, "For the rest of us, it is enough to see the tree or the house. Absorbed as we are in contemplating them, we forget ourselves." Baudelaire was the man who never forgot himself. He watched himself seeing. He watched in order to see himself watching. It was his awareness of the tree or the house which he watched, and things only appeared to him through his awareness, paler, smaller, less touching, as though he saw them through a pair of opera glasses. Whatever series or like group or category of things I decide to shoot kind of reflects where my interests are. For instance, for this burst rotary sequence in late 2018, I filmed Halloween decorations in Indo-Caribbean neighborhoods because I was very interested in diaspora. And then, a few years later, when I was very depressed and agitated. I was so keyed up and restless, I couldn't stand still while waiting for the train. So I would pace the full length of the subway platform. And, like anything, I was just like, wait, there's something here. That experience of kind of mapping out the limits of where I could walk informed this sequence. And then I noticed that the views looking off into the tunnels were quite varied, and I began to think of them as kind of quasi-modernist compositions. These dark, flat images with a few painted marks or lights. And it was through reading Benjamin's descriptions of the Paris Metro in the Arcades project, in which he describes the trains as blind, raging bulls in a labyrinth. And that was when I really started to realize that the way that the city kind of transforms your consciousness was a central preoccupation of my practice. After over half a year spent horizontal in a nightmare, I became obsessed with the dreamscape of these multi-million-dollar mansions on San Francisco's Billionaire Row in Pacific Heights. The first time I walked through this neighborhood was on a hot day in October, and I felt like I was on drugs. Benjamin associates a dialectic of exhaustion and enrapturement with wandering through Paris. He writes, an intoxication overcomes the person who tramps through the city streets for a long time without goal. With every step, the going gains in force. Ever more irresistible grows the magnetism of the next street corner, a distant mass of foliage, a street name. Then comes the hunger. It will heed nothing of the hundred possibilities of stilling it. Like an ascetic animal, he strides through an unknown quarter until, in the deepest exhaustion, he collapses into his room. Susan Buck Morris sees in these passages in Benjamin a description of how in the 19th and early 20th centuries a narcotic was made out of reality itself, destroying the human organism's power to respond politically. And this notion of being dazzled to the point that you're unable to act with a cogent political rationality is something I was concerned about when making a show that had so many elements of escapism. And yet, this desire for flight comes from feeling really boxed in by biological reality and bad luck. And I think there's actually something quite everyday about this, as Jean-Luc Nancy writes in his memoir of a heart transplant followed by cancer. I spend my time in a world in which my presence may well be too artificial or even illegitimate. Is this heightened consciousness not simply also a banal awareness of my very simple and ordinary contingency? The city is also figured as a precondition for an awareness of history in the first place. Marshall Hodgson writes that in the post-axial age, citied life implied an accelerated pace of historical change, of those actions and events that changed the presuppositions of everyday life, to the point where the individual could become conscious of such change and of the possibilities of his own actions changing the life conditions of future generations. Among other things, therefore, a social conscious became a more likely possibility. So, reading these together, I guess Benjamin, Buck Morris, and Hodgson, the city can be considered somewhere where social or historical consciousness is born, but where it is also threatened by disintegration. There's a metal garage in this piece that I sort of dance in front of, trying to film some reflections. I learned later that it belongs to the founder of Oracle, Larry Ellison, who recently received a huge contract from the Trump administration as part of the Operation Stargate, like the $500 billion AI push. Um, and this does reflect a tendency in my work, especially being in the Bay Area, to try to re-physicalize very kind of dispersed forms of kind of nebulous network power. For instance, again, those previous clips of Morning in Advance where the smoke was shot was on the marshlands right by Facebook HQ. And then this shot also from my coursening in which I composite Giacometti's disagreeable object onto the rooftop of an apartment complex next to a stained couch was shot from Google headquarters in Chelsea. I was struck by how empty those neighborhoods are. At night, San Francisco feels really empty compared to New York. But even when I lived in New York, I would sometimes shoot in ways that kind of anonymize or empty out the city, for instance, by pointing up towards the sky. And then this takes on new salience after getting sick. When you're on the ward, they don't let you go outside. So when I'm out walking around now, I'm more aware of people who aren't on the streets because they're too weak. Um, and I'm reminded of how the famous frontispiece of Hobbes's Leviathan features an empty city with only a few plague doctors wandering around. The other key figure to associate with the emptied city is De Chirico, who describes the birth of metaphysical painting in this work, Enigma of an Autumn Afternoon, as following an experience of sickness. He writes, of course, it was not the first time I had seen this square. I had barely recovered from a long and painful intestinal illness and was in a state of almost morbid sensitivity. The whole world around me, including the marble of the buildings and fountains, seemed to me to be convalescing. I had the strange impression that I was looking at these things for the first time. Now, every time I look at this picture, I see that moment once again. Nevertheless, the moment is an enigma for me in that it is inexplicable. So, again, this idea of illness producing an epiphany, leaving you speechless, transforming your perception of urban space is relevant to this exhibition made during a period of what I thought was recovery. Um, I wasn't thinking about De Chirico yet when I shot this video pointer statue, but in retrospect, there's an affinity, with his statues. And in my recent essay for Parapraxis, Not Nothing, Not Enough, I wrote that illness petrifies the body. My head felt more like a skull, statuesque, heavy with the cancer's indifference to my thoughts and plans. Um, it's a very ugly statue of Junipero Serra that I pass on the highway on the way to the hospital. And again, through familiarity, you start to ask, is there something there? I was thinking about how in Nightlife, Cyprien Gaillard filmed The Thinker outside the Cleveland Museum of Art that had its foot blown off by the Weather Underground in 1970. And this statue was targeted during the 2020 uprisings. When it zooms out, there's some residual red paint on its cheeks, so it looks like he's blushing. He points west in the direction of manifest destiny. Pointing for me also evokes Althusserian interpolation, which is basically the idea that your subjectivity comes into focus and kind of congeals in relationship to power. The famous example being a cop that says, "Hey, you," and depending on what that evokes in you is revealing on what kind of subject you are. I think Fanon is talking about something similar when he describes a white child saying "Maman, look," followed by a French racial slur. And even the sign in Good Attack saying "Die terrorist scum" is to me another technology of interpolation. The third time I went to film this statue, there was a semi truck idling in the adjacent rest stop, and it caused my tripod to vibrate at a steady frequency. This is one that also might be tough to kind of rescreen through the screen recording, but it caused my tripod to vibrate at a steady frequency that, combined with the rolling shutter of the camera, produced this jitter and skewing effect. So you get the effect of either you or the hand of the statue quivering, maybe in rage or fear. So it animated the statue and completed the piece. Um, the semi-truck produced an inaudible drone, which reminded me of Bill Viola's The Sound of One-Line Scanning, in which he discusses a relationship between video and audio. He writes, technologically, video has evolved out of sound, the electromagnetic, and its close association with cinema is misleading. The video camera, being an electronic transducer of physical energy into electrical impulses, bears a closer original relation to the microphone than it does the film camera. There are two other drones in the exhibition, one of which is here in Urchin Forager's Luka Doncic. The ambient sound of the video is tuned to a chord using an EQ, sculpting the existing frequencies into a harmony rather than adding a score. You sculpt the kind of ambient sound that's already there. From around late 2019 to early 2021, I focused more on music than visual art. I don't have the room here to go into full detail about how all of this totally transformed my practice, but if you think about how rap and footwork producers coax out latent qualities in recorded media and then shape them so that they can fit together, I ended up bringing some of that sensibility back to the videos. This video is 16 minutes long, and when I was working with the footage, there were specific frames in which the motion of the lights and the figures created gleaming, beautiful compositions. I wanted to dilate these moments so that they could become discernible to the viewer, because you would just kind of miss them. So that's the role of the kind of ramp slow-mos and the loops within the piece. The title of this piece came from thinking about association and substitution in psychoanalysis. Mavericks Beach in the Bay Area, where I filmed, the color of the blue bucket, and the shared consonants between Urchin and Doncic led me to thinking about the Dallas Mavericks, a team that Luka had just taken to the finals. Doncic was injured throughout the postseason, and I think the reason why the NBA became a big fixation during cancer was in part because of how people project themselves onto the health trajectory of the players, expressing hope and dismay when Kyrie's ACL is dislocated, Paul George's tibia is shattered, or Wemby discovers blood clots in his shoulder. Everyone says Kawhi's body is giving up on him or failing him. Same with Embiid. So again, this idea of your body as indifferent to your aspirations on the court or in the game. So these are ultimately, again, stories about contingency. Men who, despite all their skill and the advanced nature of their medical staff, and the money people stand to make from their success, sometimes the shots just don't fall. Sometimes they get hurt. I have the same chance to relapse after transplant as Russell Westbrook has to make a three-point field goal. He's bad from behind the arc, but if you watch the Nuggets, he still knocks him down sometimes. This is one of two pieces in the show that references the NBA. The other is hospital scene. The West is a bloodbath, which is a phrase you hear a lot that refers to the fact that the Western Conference is the stronger conference. Yeah, again, I was dealing with cancer on the West Coast, so in California, and also watching a genocide in Gaza funded by America and Europe, so the West. So the phrase "the West is a bloodbath" kind of exceeded its context. Dave Hickey wrote that basketball is better than religion, and Paul Pfeiffer, someone who looms large for me and many video artists, is someone who has drawn a parallel between the two. in John 3:16, Pfeiffer captures the shape of attention, kind of condensing around the ball. The point of attention switches to the body in the event of injury. If you were to diagram the shape of that collective attention, it would look like Jay DeFeo's Rose or Jewel, two works which, again, like many Bay Area artists, um, made a big impact when I first encountered them as a teenager. You see this starburst form literally everywhere. For example, when I lived in Northeast London, I lived right across the street from a mosque, and if I happened to go out to get groceries, or go to the gym during the call to prayer, you would kind of notice how community members would all leave their homes and converge on this one point. So if you were to look at it from above, it would look something like this. Um, and then at the same time, one other kind of interest in grad school was people like art historian Samuel Edgerton, who saw linear perspective as the visual corollary to an ideology of European conquest, which was something I was interested in exploring because I used to do a lot of perspective studies in my drawings. And I put this together to show that this star form was always there in my own drawings. So I kind of isolated these details to show how since 2018, this star form was nascent until it became the only element I wanted to draw. Um, it begins in 2018, interestingly, as the shape of bloody dismemberment. At one point in graduate school, I wrote, the 15th century saw the emergence of a new global image of a spherical Earth, accompanied by a revolution in spatial consciousness, what Carl Schmitt called global linear thinking. Schmidt describes how the formal division of the planet began through papal edicts and territorial treaties. Europe was divided by rayas into what would become separate sovereign states governed by European common law, while amity lines designated the New World as a free zone where everything is possible and man confronts other men as a wild animal. So he draws from Hobbes's Leviathan and is echoed in Tsvetan Todorov's description of indigenous genocide as heralding the advent of modern times, fixating on an image of dismemberment as a sign of the excess and modern as opposed to anachronistic. There's a temptation when you're confronted with these forms of violence to describe them as, say, medieval. But his argument is that they're wholly modern, and that's the character of the conquest. So, this image of dismemberment can be read as the lattice work of global linear thinking intersecting with the human body. So, I think the impact of Schmidt, which I'll talk about more later, was really this notion of drawing lines as something that can be quite politically loaded. And this idea of carving up the Earth's crust into legal zones into which common law or jungle law will selectively apply, and the way that people get caught up and carved up by these lines. At the same time, all these forms are ambivalent. Again, they are just forms. And I take a dialectical approach to even something as visceral as dismemberment. For example, again, I'm staring down a bone marrow transplant in like 3 weeks from today. And medicine regards the body as something that can be, to a certain extent, torn apart almost to the cellular level and radically recombined, in this case, hollowing out my bone marrow with chemotherapy and total body irradiation and replacing it with a donor's immune system, turning me into what is literally called a chimera. This is obviously a medical marvel. I'll quote Nancy again. Um, Personal contingency intersects with the contingency of technological history. Earlier, I would be dead. Later, I would survive by other means. But I always finds itself tightly squeezed in a wedge of technical possibilities. So, tendentiously, I would say that the dismembered figure is not necessarily just an image of victimhood or catastrophe, but a chance at life as well. So I'm going to move through this kind of graphology quite quickly so you can see how this abstraction, a star, even here in Morning in Advance, the kind of rotating head star from this scene feels like a precursor now, um, an explosion, um, a sense of rupture, fireworks, floating head figure, So bullet holes. Um, on the firework, I really like how in aesthetic theory, Adorno elevates both the firework and the apparition as kind of ideal models for artworks that don't attempt to basically transcend their own temporality. Um, Here, a vortex on the right, kind of sparks in the air, um, and then returning to a kind of wound, as you can see in a kind of exploding belly here. So again, this kind of emerged until it was really the only thing I wanted to draw. I tell my students there's no shortcuts here. You really have to make enough drawings to discern these patterns, and allow these inchoate forms to bloom. And that was something, we talked about in this exhibition that really emphasizes process. Um, so within the context of this exhibition, they structured a process through which I could test new approaches to drawings that would go on to find a form, go on to find a home in the larger drawings, and also kind of exhaust these approaches. And that was itself quite satisfying, watching forms emerge, crest, and disintegrate over the duration of making the exhibition. And this series serves as a barometer through which I could map my own tendencies and predilections. So we called them the spine of the show and a non-sequential animation. So I'm just going to move through them so you can hopefully track this process of emergence and transformation. And then finally at the end, actually animating them, inspired by abstract animation, people like the Whitney brothers, Oscar Fischinger, and Lillian Schwartz. So to continue to illustrate the process for this exhibition, I included these couple slides to show how you can get inspired by media, and then the practice can also kind of propel that. So around a month before I shot the footage on the right, I watched 2001: A Space Odyssey for the first time. I really loved how Hal was represented with this red circular light, and I had already noticed that circles were starting to pop up in different ways in my practice. Um, and then that influenced how I depicted the IV pole, also as a kind of monolith. And then I had a green light in my studio. So that changed how I looked at this De Chirico painting later on. And I made Stranger, the drawing on the right, in response to that form, and also some debates within Italian modernism about fragmentation versus solidity in painting. There had been kind of a trajectory of dispersion and fluidity in the drawing. And I wanted to try something more solid. I went to see the collection show To Exalt the Ephemeral at the Berkeley Art Museum 3 times over the course of exhibition, in part because I kept wanting to revisit these works by Rosemary Mayer, Chris Corrales, Sarah Charlesworth, and Bruce Connor. And visiting the exhibition when Otto came to visit California with the curator Tausif Noor was a very important experience because their shared enthusiasm for the work was infectious. And, they didn't burden the work with doing too much. They would kind of appreciate it for what it was and how it fit into both the exhibition and art history. So the first Earth drawing happened when I had this star form on the left with a cut in the center, and I couldn't figure out what to put in it. And then in that moment, I thought back to when Paul Gilroy, my MA advisor, emphasized how W.E.B. Du Bois's decision to put the Earth on the cover of The World in Africa in 1947, a time when Du Bois was committing himself to the peace movement, was a radical gesture. And then Schmidt's Nomos of the Earth, which I discussed earlier, was another fixation. And then I ended up writing my dissertation on late style in Du Bois, focusing on the Black Flame trilogy, which were 3 novels that he completed when he was in his early 90s. And, he was kind of losing it. And I was struck by the visionary hallucinatory sequences that dot the text, in which, for example, the protagonist, man's art, so man's art, he really kind of leans into his aestheticism towards the end. He has this vision on a train of a spider from hell spinning a web of American gold that envelops the earth. Again, a kind of diagram of imperialism. So again, we have this kind of returning motif of a sphere latticed with lines. Today, any image of the earth brings up climate change. So, this piece is very subtly titled End of the World. And then this is grazers. So I filmed these sheep and goats, which are brought in to clear dry brush in my neighborhood. It's a service that has become increasingly popular since they make quicker work of the dry brush than humans. And California is obviously facing worse and worse wildfire threats every year. Excuse me. The Earth also brings up the fact of a shared kind of finite domicile. And I think it's interesting to notice how kind of politically ambivalent this also is. You can look at the Earth and argue that its interconnectedness makes it ontologically unstable and permeable, and therefore we need walled, fortified states. Or you can use it as evidence for the possibility of shared human community that would be, say, realized by pursuing a global communist horizon. It can kind of cut either way. Um, I titled the first star One World or None after a quote from Norman O. Brown in his very strange collection of 1980s lectures explaining why he, a new left philosopher interested in like cybernetics and the erotic, became interested in Islam. I believe he did convert, but I'm actually not sure. So here's the full quotation. There are 2 kinds of social criticism alive in the world today, Marxism and Islam. 2 tired old revolutionary horses, neither of them doing very well. But it would be a mistake to try to take any comfort from their failure. The human race is at stake. And they both, Marxism and Islam, would agree on one proposition. There will be one world or there will be none. Okay, so I don't know if this is true, and I'm definitely not well read enough in either tradition to assess if this is actually true about them. But again, one thing I talk to my students about because their writing, and I think writing in general, has become incredibly kind of hedged and like folded over. So sometimes I just like a really kind of punchy provocation. That one's punchy. There will be one world or there will be none. So in that case, to offer 2 Earths is impossible. We see them and we know they're 2 representations of one thing and are maybe tasked with reconciling them. And then they also look like a doorway. And I like how they play off the shots of doors and entrances in Facade Rotary Sequence, which I played earlier, San Francisco video. Um, to speak more about the red background, which you saw earlier in the last star, and we'll see later in a drawing called Hospital Scene. Most people represent nothingness with black, and I represent it with red, after confronting a cellular reality in my blood that kind of holds the trump card on, anything I want to do or experience. So the last thing I'll note about this is, I was mentioning how you can kind of track how forms become a fixation and then get exhausted over the course of an exhibition. That's exactly what happened with the Earth, on the right. I'm not even finishing it. So it kind of dissolved and turned into more ambiguous cosmic forms. So the status of the Earth in my work, as with all of it, including my interpretations of it, is in flux. And in the meantime, I've enjoyed tracking the Earth in, um, for example, the first representation of an insane artist in William Hogarth's 18th century etching of Bethlehem Royal Hospital, infamously known as Bedlam. There's a patient shown drawing a schematic diagram of the Earth, and he's actually based on a real person, William Whiston, who was obsessed with trying to solve the longitude problem, which the British government was offering a monetary reward for. He had all sorts of kooky proposals. One of them was installing boats linked together 100 miles apart all the way across the Atlantic, and then having them fire their cannons at midnight, and somehow other boats would be able to gauge their location relative to the sound. So that's why there's a chain link to a boat in the bottom left-hand corner of uh, this depicted drawing on the wall of an asylum. These sculptures by Will Thompson, um, this series of paintings actually by Robert Bordeaux, these by Pettibon, these by Paul Tech, this shot in Laurie Anderson's Oh Superman music video, this scene from Joris Ivan's A Tale of the Wind, and the kind of opening sequence in Hans-Jürgen Cyberberg's 7-hour film about Hitler that I could not finish. Um, so when I made this drawing, I had just read Agnes Martin's selected writing. So I was thinking about the lattice again, and also solitude, making work in solitude and inspiration. Um, she's also, sorry, she's also a conservative, I think. The whole like latter part of the book is like politics isn't real. The only thing that exists is individuals. And also she has this very weird sidebar where she's like, I love the police, but some useful stuff in there for the studio. Um, the Earth became an ambiguous planet. I introduced a horizon and this arch motif that actually came from imagining a circle moving up in a straight line and then taking a leap. So there's kind of an impossible teleportation. Um, but it also doubles as a reduced figure in which the head floats above the body. And that was, another question raised by my essay in Parapraxis about psychosomatic versus organic illness. This question on what's going on above the neck versus below the neck. Um, I relate to Sally Rooney when she says, when I'm writing my novels, I feel like I am a floating brain. I forget that I physically exist. And part of this exhibition is, a real joy that I was able to exist where I prefer to exist in the world of discourse, ideas, texts, and art, rather than caged by, a failing vessel that requires different kinds of controlled poisoning and selective obliteration in order to be cured. So that's also in this kind of floating head motif. I included this detail to show how figuration can creep back in and to read this quotation that I love from Bachelard's dissertation. Detail is richness, but also uncertainty. Along with its subtle nuances occur profoundly irrational disturbances. At the level of detail, thought and reality appear to be set adrift from another, so that reality loses its solidity in a certain way, its constancy, its substance. Finally, reality and thought are engulfed in the same nothingness. I think there's something really true, a reason why this resonates, I really do lose myself in these details as I draw. It's very pleasurable. It makes time melt away, but at the same time, it's not lost time because I have the drawings to show for it. I have the show to show for it. Again, I relate to Rooney here, actually, when she says, the years I spent on this book, this show, passed, and I can never have them back, but I do have the book. I would say the same thing about this show and this kind of dialectic of awareness and denial about the ruthless absolute, untranscendable forward march of time has been intensified by the prospect of a kind of radically uncertain timeline now. And video editing feels different too. You know, my proclivity for the loop and having kind of absolute control over time. Um, Appears as a sort of negative of the truth, which is you can't pause, slow down, loop, or repeat in lived time. This is actually a very artificial quality of video. So similar to the Earth, I'm not sure where this kind of cosmic imagery is going, how it will endure. But again, I've started tracking it, for instance, in on the left, Arno J. Mayer's book about the final solution, which is called Why Did the Heavens Not Darken? Titled after the first person account of Solomon Bar Simpson of the first church sanctioned mass homicide of Jews in Europe in 1096. Um, the lament over the slaughter takes on a cosmic valence. Simpson wrote, "Why did the heavens not darken and the stars not withhold their radiance? Why did the sun and moon turn, why, excuse me, why did not the sun and moon turn dark?" Um, and then on the right, I was struck by this recurring phrase by civilians in Gaza. I was hesitant to include this, but these messages do seem addressed to us in a way. You know, when they heard Israeli airstrikes getting closer, they would post this phrase on Twitter: I am not a number, but a planet in itself. I have ambitions and dreams that I have always wanted to achieve. You know, it's a very heartbreaking phrase, and I've been trying to figure out what to make of this contrast between being a number versus a planet. To me, it's something like if you aggregate up all your thoughts, your aspirations, your relationships with other people and the world, and your capacity to affect them in small ways over the course of a lived life, the innumerable fleeting emotions and memories that pass through you every second of every day, you come up with an image as dense, as irreducible, complicated, grand, and beautiful as a planet. And you know, my situation is as different as it could be from someone in Gaza. At the same time, when you are faced with that untranscendable limit, the kind of infinite fractal density of life really does swell to cosmic proportions, as does your longing to live. So I really think there's something important and instructive communicated when someone says, "I'm not a number, I'm a planet." And I really think there must be a reason why this caught on. Other places I've located this cosmic imagery. These are illustrations from, excuse me, by French caricaturist J.J. Granville's Un Autre Monde that Klaus Teuwellet included in Male Fantasies when he's talking about the gender dynamics of the Freikorps, but he doesn't really elaborate on their inclusions. They're just kind of in there. And then these diagrams in Thomas Kuhn's book about the Copernican revolution, which reminded me also of Nietzsche's quotation that since Copernicus, man has been rolling from the center towards X. Um, Stills from Raoul Ruiz's City of Pirates, and then another from Joris Ivan's Tale of the Wind. 10 suns were threatening to burn the earth, and then the figure like shoots them down with arrows. Um, these lyrics from Stevie Wonder's Saturn, you know, specifically, you know, it's kind of Saturn becomes this kind of utopia in this song, and this line, "People live to be 205." Okay. This is another drawing in which this kind of animated circle moving up and then taking some kind of leap or floating head figure, depending on how you look at it, appears. I read Ad Reinhardt's selected writings over the course of making this show, and I felt challenged by his kind of prohibitive approach to art and representation, which he attributed to, in his words, the ancient Hebraic and Islamic distrust of images. And he's got his own kind of Orientalism, truthfully. I also felt challenged by his remark, "There is nothing less significant in art, nothing more exhausting and immediately exhausted than endless variety." I was getting towards the end of the show and I read that and I thought, wow, I've done nothing but make, you know, varieties of drawings. Um, so I felt challenged by it. And there was something about the kind of absolute effacement of Reinhardt's own hand in the black paintings because the brushstrokes mean kind of variation that was enticing. And that is what inspired these kind of flat layers of shaded graphite, in addition to a kind of smaller test drawing that was one of the star drawings. This work is titled Hospital Scene. The West is a Bloodbath. And in the center, you can see a figure lying horizontal in a sick bed. Um, this one's tough in the reproduction. It's one that you really have to kind of get up close to and sift through. Um, Again, I thought about Ed Reinhardt making the black paintings horizontally, and I haven't gotten a chance to look super deep into discourses around horizontality in painting, but I'm interested in these photos of him where he's bent at the waist, like he's also kind of paying respect, submitting to the paintings, and also how he leached the oil out of the paint, rendering it matte and also vulnerable to chemicals like a body. You know, there's that anecdote that one of the black paintings got damaged by tiny droplets of floor cleaner used to mop the gallery in which it was exhibited. Um, and then I was also thinking about Kanye West's unreleased 2010 track "Never See Me Again," you know, which obviously connotes disappearance. He has a line where he says, "I'm liable to be a liability." So the repetition of the word lie, thinking about lying down, and feeling at risk when you're horizontal, um, a liability. Um, So, in the description for the event, I said I'd implot my health within our kind of dismal political conjuncture, and the Trump administration's freeze on NIH grant funding, which is, you know, the NIH being an irreplaceable driver of biomedical research globally, and research into cancer, heart disease, vaccines already looks like it's going to get stalled. The hospital where I'm going to undergo treatment, where I am undergoing treatment, faces disruptions in a whole host of banal but essential administrative and safety processes within the hospital. Um, but as Bolaño wrote of his own diagnosis with terminal liver disease, writing about illness, especially if one is gravely ill, can be torture. And I really kind of hit a wall when I was trying to write about this. So I got one paragraph, and then I'm going to let the work say the rest. I don't really think there's much to say beyond what Anne Boyer said quite simply in her kind of harrowing tale of having and then beating triple negative breast cancer, the undying. Sure, I do not want to die. I still have a lot left to do. So this is me. I'm confronting something totally indifferent, which doesn't care about my thoughts and plans, and yet there persists an attempt to bargain with it in human terms. Don't kill me. I'm VJ. I made some beauty, and I'm a good friend and a teacher. Whatever. The voice is asinine. The idea that death is deserved is something to be outgrown by early elementary school, and maybe we should never teach kids that at all. I don't really know. The mind conjures images of asceticism and dismemberment. I'll have no money, no house, no eyes, lop off my hands and feet. Prison in America actually seems so bad that I would probably choose the gamble of a high risk blood cancer of an extended prison sentence, but I definitely would do a short one. I'd do 10 years, maybe 15, so I'd be 44 when I got out. I don't think I could do 20, but I did have to think about it. It's such a long time, and the world will be very different in 2045. But it's unclear who you're addressing. There's nobody listening because we're not dealing with a punitive agent with a cold heart, but with bad code. That's what causes the blast to proliferate. Broken and recombined translocated genetic material into shitty letters. And then if you put the bad letters together, it spells disintegration. And we're dealing with the absolute indifference of the letter. This is a drawing that we cut. I want to direct you towards the kind of biomorphic representation of the spine, a locus for treatment with bone pain and lumbar punctures and bone marrow biopsies. So this is details of 3 spines in the show. Um, and then 2 paintings by Luke Toymans that I thought a lot about while making the show. Um, these got cut, but I like them. There are 2 animations in which I kind of animate B cell smears as a painterly mark. This is the last slide. This is in the show. A 30-second video titled "Void in the Eggs slash Sunset." Thanks so much, guys.
Mm.
I think we're gonna try to do Q&A. No, Otto?
My phone serves as a microphone now. Do you understand me?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can hear you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Vijay, for this very extensive insight in the process of the show and into your work. Um, yeah, I think we should open up for questions now. Anyone has here or online, give us a sign.
Okay.
Yeah, go for it, Blanca. Huh? Blanca, we hear you because your microphone is still switched on. Um,
Hmm.
do you have a question?
Actually, hi. I was not aware that my microphone was on. More to congratulate, and I am quite impressed by the whole work. And from the bottom of my heart, want to wish the best in the next few weeks when you are in treatment.
Thanks so much, Blanca. Means a lot.
I think there's just so much to digest now.
That's okay. Should we call it? I don't know.
No more questions. It's very late already in Hannah. No.
Um, I wanted to hear more about, you said writing has become hedged and folded over, and I thought it was such a good way of expressing something I've noticed and had a hard time articulating. Like I had the idea that everyone's writing in this kind of almost like 18th century novel way, this kind of subclauses and kind of loops, but it's not exactly like that. How you put it is much better. I just wanted to hear more about what you think of that and why you think it's happening.
I'm really not sure. That's a super good question. Thanks, Hannah. I mean, I wonder if they know that they can. I think it has to do maybe. I could start thinking about it. I was actually messaging you about this, like with some of the norms of academic discourse that do involve Ben. I'm stealing this from Ben. Hey, Ben, has used that phrase semiotic inflation or something. Like you have this like tendency really in the literature that they're instructed to read in academia. I mean, I'm working with students at Cooper um, to have like a very high volume. And you know, I'm working in this kind of tutoring context where I have these 45-minute sessions. So I think it's like steered me towards just trying to, you have to make progress in that short amount of time. So it's like led me towards this more, yeah, kind of like punchy, polemical, like kind of like knife-like thing where, um, you know, you compromise. You are compromising nuance, or you're compromising I don't know, accounting for everyone. I mean, that's the other thing about the students. They want to make sure that they're not like excluding anyone or stepping on anyone's toes or something like that. I feel like I sound like I'm like sounding like a boomer or something. But I do think there's like yeah, just like a reluctance to like make claims. And it's very interesting to me because their sense of, wanting to be comprehensive and wanting to introduce all these kinds of caveats into their writing um, is coming from them responding to a really like awful political moment as well. Um, so I don't know. There's an attempt. It's a really good question. I don't know. I don't know. What do you think? I see
It
Ben's
just
hands up also.
just seems to, I mean, just quickly seems to relate to some of the things you were referencing. Like I didn't catch exactly, I think you said an Italian modernist debate about fragmentation versus solidity. I was literally taking notes because I was so excited by everything you were saying, but and learning so much. But yeah, something about fragmentation and solidity and yeah, the planetary versus the number that feels like it's also in this kind of like compacted versus overexpanded speech, but in a slightly perverse way. But anyway, those are my thoughts.
No, no, that's super interesting. I got to think more about that. Agnes Martin doesn't like circles because she says they're too expansive. Actually, that was kind of interesting. Um, and yeah, it's like I think it's also like why do I'm working mostly with art students now also. So I mean, Jan Verwoerd has talked about this too, about the challenge of a lot of them have empty studios, a lot of them feel pretty blocked up. So you gotta get them somewhere quickly, and sometimes being uh, overly deterministic. Yeah, like maybe in the Italian modernist context, like too solid or something is again kind of compensating for the sense, you could associate it, I guess, probably with digital media and a feeling of kind of dispersiveness. Um, and then that really kind of has affected my tastes. I didn't end up including him in this presentation, but like in Krakauer's, his magnum opus, I guess, about Weimar cinema, he has a line where he's just like, yeah, like circles mean chaos. I was like, what, what do you mean circles mean chaos? Like we're like taught to be very dialectical. You like nothing means anything in and of itself because it has to be determined by its social context, and that will be kind of unfolding within a historical process. But he just, it's kind of maybe I should I like I wouldn't say it. I used to say it's like a nuts on the table moment. It's just like no, like circles mean chaos, and I like including those as provocations. Okay, I see now all right, people are getting into it. I think Ben had his hand up.
Hey VJ, that was really amazing. Sorry, I have a cold, so my question's a little dispersed maybe, but um I was interested in your talk about some of the texts you cited because there was like a big sort of pool of texts on like fascist Germany, like male fantasies. Why didn't the heavens darken? I haven't read that book, but whatever that book is. So I was kind of like interested in that pool of citation, which seems maybe in some ways like in time and space distant from what your work is more locally about, but also it made me think too, like when I read some of these texts, like male fantasies and so on, I'm really overcome by like intense depressive, like nihilistic feelings or something, like being immersed in like stories about like structural murder and death and so on. And so I guess I'm interested in the like emotional and intellectual sort of impetus you're drawing from in that kind of pool of text.
No, dude, it's a super good question, and I mean, I think we share this kind of relationship with media as a barometer. Like, oh shit, I'm listening to this kind of music, I'm reading these kinds of texts. Like, am I okay? That comes from a certain sense of like self opacity, maybe. Um, I think it also came from really from doing that MA with Gilroy. I mean, he's just a super intense guy. I think I told you this like one time I went into office hours and like, I mean, it's interesting. He just gave away his library actually, which felt like kind of like a whoa moment. But he was like surrounded by books, they're like all creased open. And like, I don't know, maybe this is like visceral, but it felt like at least like four of them had swastikas on the cover. Like the dude is like, obsessed with racism, and obsessed with kind of facing that down. And again, the kinds of people he assigns, assigning a literal Nazi jurist like Schmidt, I think is really his commitment to studying racism and think that it can be made sense of Also, I mean, there's also that quote from Badiou from that piece I sent you after the Paris attacks. Our wound is not so recent, where he's like, let us begin with I'm paraphrasing, like, let us begin with the idea that like there's nothing on this earth that is unthinkable. And I think that is probably, like part of the interest is like, um, it's a tradition, I think the Frankfurt School, even some of the, it's like methodologically fraught, but some of the stuff around the authoritarian personality, I think people are taking that up now. Like I really like that piece in Parapraxis by Jake Fromm, about Zionism as anti-Semitism and stuff, like really deciding that like we're not going to consign anything. It is a Frankfurt School commitment, I would say. Like we're not going to consign anything to the irrational. Like we're not going to dismiss it like that. We're gonna look at it and like we have this, what is it? Is it an enlightenment conviction, maybe tendentiously, that like it is like knowable, and stuff. And then, in terms of coming back to it now, like there is a part of it where it's been a super difficult, few months. I'm totally devastated since I got re-diagnosed in late January. So you like kind of find company in the darkness. Like I did read. I think that was one of the first things the first thing I watched after I got re-diagnosed was the 3.5 hour long Nixon biopic, the Oliver Stone one, which is not a very good movie. And then I think I read that book. So, for sure it's kind of, and then writing this now, it's kind of like, I'm just thinking more about the stuff I've read more recently. Yeah. More to think about with that one though.
Yeah,
Claire?
thank
Let's see. Hi. I let's see. I had like a question, but mostly what I wanted to do is just like underscore some of your points because I thought they were so awesome, and also like just to thank you for sharing like from this kind of like really personal place of like suffering because like I've been thinking like a lot about suffering as like a kind of consciousness accelerant, and so like to kind of like be in that experience, and to like bring like stuff back from that like for the collective is like really powerful, and like really generous, and like really just like kind of like a just so want to thank you for that. But you had mentioned something about circles, and I would really recommend if you haven't already, like Sufi, like there's so much Sufi writing on like kind of like this circle, like the point is like the from which the line extends, like which contains everything, and it's like your drawings make me think of these Sufi diagrams. It's just really beautiful. Like Ibn Arabi talks about like uh, just like a lot of kind of like really beautiful ways of illustrating these things diagrammatically, and also like Reza I don't know how to pronounce his last name. Reza Negarestani. I think maybe you mentioned someone who had like converted to Islam like as an act of resistance. Wasn't him, was it? Because he also did
No,
that.
no, that
And
that that was Norman O'Brown. Yeah.
yeah, Reza just recently actually kind of came out and was like, I'm converting to Islam, like as a kind of, and like renounced like all his former work as like more or less like cybernetic research for the DoD or whatever. So you should look into his stuff because he's so awesome. Um and uh have you ever read Screening the Body, Elisa Cartwright? You should check that out. It's tracing medicine's visual culture. And it's like going through like kind of like imaging technologies of like medicine, and kind of the ways in which like, and like comparing it to film and like moving image. And so like I don't know, I've always been really captivated by like your video work. And so um just like I think it'd just be a cool read. But yeah, thanks for sharing all this. Uh,
Thanks so much, Claire. All those references sound, especially Screening the Body, sound super interesting. Um, all right, so Zoe dropped one in the chat. Um, You brought up Adorno's writing on firework, their quality as apparitions. They appear and vanish. This seems at odds with your use of the loop, its digestibility through repetition. Loops are productive of thought. These stars and globes seem infinite without duration and also repeated across works. Can you say more about the fireworks show and duration? I played the sunset twice. Hmm. I think I got to go back into. I just worked through that passage with a student. I mean, I think Adorno's objection is really to works that try to like leap out of their own historicity or something. So the fireworks become like a horizon or something for like something that is still durational, but so condensed because he also doesn't really like what he calls he ends up calling it like a 0 point of like pure subjectivity or something. And interestingly enough, he associates that with I think the more kind of like more like cosmic oriented Kandinsky paintings. And you know, j just to kind of talk around this, that was something that really came up now in more of the literature I've reading since completing the show. This like motif of like, did Ben just drop it? He like, does he have it next to him? That's so funny. Yeah, yeah, he did. Sorry, so funny. Um, and then there's like you see these kinds of, I guess, debates and forms of contestation like occur throughout art history. So, for example, like this early interwar early Kandinsky, too cosmic, and the Dadaists come along and they say, no, we need to be thinking more about the political conjuncture, and this is, shall I say, like navel gazing or something. And I think you see that over and over. Also, like it comes up a lot in Buchloh. I think you could see this in Buchloh's polemic against Boys as well, where like this guy is, you know, regressing to myth, really, whereas I believe that, as Adorno says, art, whatever the quote is, like art is part of the disenchantment of the world or something. It's supposed to move in the opposite direction from magic, and those tensions were really, I think it relates to what I was saying also about the city and, the idea of the city as narcotic, and then also like having a very different relationship with escapism now because like, these past, now like 14, 15 months have been totally unbearable. And I'm just like, like I'm just gonna leave. And what you take leave into changes. You can take leave into, these really dark texts, as I was talking about with Ben, or you can take leave into just like watching a basketball in this kind of very ambient way and stuff. So, that tension, I guess, between kind of infant. Okay, Zoe, maybe I can put it this way because I do feel challenged by this question. I think there's something about iteration in the show that does kind of undercut it. And I was also interested in some of the like stuff from like 12, 13 years ago around like uh, what Rubinstein was calling the provisional painters, who kind of rehearse a dialectic of ambivalence and conviction in their work, is where he kind of lands. So I think the fact that like, yes, it's this like, cosmic geometric imagery, but it's always different. You go in the studio and you make a new one. And in that way, it is like kind of, it takes on these qualities of video, these qualities of duration and stuff. And that is very important to me, that I'm not making claims about. I said it in like the vernissage video, and I was trying to not kind of retread the stuff that I said in the video that they made about the show. But like, you know, this like I don't have any strong opinions about the order of the cosmos and stuff. My formation is really not in any kind of spiritually inflected literature, but I did find these kinds of relationships with geometry and symmetry as solution to problems with art, which is why I think Ed Reinhardt is so inspiring. Hannah said stars are the definition of duration. Yeah, yeah, they live a long time. I don't really know. Adorno also has a line in Theses about Occultism that's like, nothing is more alien than the stars. Also, was thinking about that one when I reread it. Um, so I think the fact that like you're going in there and you're making a new one, and none of them are making kind of a grand claim and stuff. They're just like, there's that other, I think Adorno says this about Brecht also, like it's just, you're just fixing thoughts in motion or something. Um, yeah. Okay. Bryce, I think, was next.
Yeah, maybe I think I have perhaps a good segue to your last sentence about like fixing thoughts in motion. Because I just sort of had two notes and then a direct question. One was about like I'm kind of an etymology nerd, and I was thinking about the word hallucination because you used it at one point. I think when you were describing um, some of Hobbes's like frontispieces, that like the origin of the word has this relationship to the word ambulate, like to be hallucinating wasn't necessarily to be dreaming, but to be like wandering in your thoughts, and it had a relationship to the word that meant wandering around a city. And I was thinking about that with your drawing process because it seemed like so much of your early work was about perambulation, and then like your earlier video works, and then once you moved into the format of the drawing more intensely, there was still this kind of moving that was happening in your mind instead. Um, the second is maybe more of a question, and it was about like how how you think about the interior of the body in your work. Like Yannis Canellis has this interesting assessment of like Baroque Mexican art, where he describes that there's a particular way of depicting the body of Christ and intrusions into the body of Christ that are like more universal as claims than in comparable Baroque art in say like France from the same period, where it's like you're looking into the body and you're meant to be looking into every man's body and seeing it deeply. And I think it's the reason I wanted to bring up that quote to you was because I've noticed far more like video works that deal with vivisection as a subject, like intrusion into the body. And your work isn't about vivisection. Like there's blood, there's some kind of like inner biological system that you're talking about and you're referencing in your work visually, but it's not so literal. And the third question was just about landscape. Um, that this occurred to me when you showed one of your video works, the one with the statue, when you were talking about the Kiriko. And I think it was like one of the video works that seemed the most withdrawn from the urban context. Like you're kind of, most of your work is dealing, it seems to me like it's dealing with the city and dealing with the stars and that kind of experience that you have when you're in a city, and the only um, resort that you have to the scale of the world outside of the metropolis is just like looking at the moon and going, yeah, there's other stuff. But I mean, the history of illness is also a history in Europe of convalescence and convalescence by the sea. So that's why I wanted to ask about the landscape thing.
Yeah, Bryce, thanks. Those are three very thoughtful questions. I'm gonna I think I'll do them in reverse. Um, yeah, I think it really comes pretty early on with, when I went to like art summer camp at SFAI, and you get introduced to this tradition of like F64 and like Bay Area photography and naturalism and things like that. And then so I called some of those sequences in, where I'm shooting like the burned out forest. I'm like, these are landscape videos. I called the drawings, the gouache drawings of the earth. Um, I also consider those landscapes in a way. Um, and yeah, that pointer statue is withdrawn, and that was something that changed. I live in the suburbs, so I had to move back in with my family. So um, it became I have to take quite a trek to go and actually do what I like to do, which is traverse the city and stuff. So there are works here that are kind of more car based, and that pointer statue is one of them. Um, and you know, I I don't I don't know exactly how that troubles things. But at the end of the day, we still landed on describing it all as kind of urban space, but the kind of urban suburban split in this show um, is something that is I don't know. It's a little bit open. I'm still figuring it out. And then also taking these trips like to the beach. I mean, I think I saw this like on Twitter, like the idea that like the West Coast feels like I mean, you see, even seeing the kind of work that is on view here, like there's a sense that like we man conquered nature in a less thorough way out here or something. You can feel really dwarfed by it. And that also has this sense of, kind of losing yourself in the landscape. And that's something that people seek out here. And I always go back to this idea of political ambivalence to that, the fact that environmentalism used to be a position associated with the right, and now it's not really. Um, okay. So, and then the second question you had was related to the interior of the body. It's a super good question. It's super weird. Um, I think non-C is pretty good on that, or even someone like Wojnarowicz. Wojnarowicz has a quote where he's like, it's funny, I like ended up saying something very similar, like there's something inside me and it wants me dead or something. There's something in my blood and it's trying to kill me or something like that. And that experience of like estrangement um is you know, I will say it's like it's been generative in the studio. That's that's like I guess a silver lining. I would much rather just not have those genetics basically. Um so, it just has been from this experience. I grew up in a medical family also, so there probably is some kind of early formation of like I don't know, like my dad has medical textbooks and then you open them up and you like see something. I mean, I have a memory of like looking at like a bunch of babies with cleft palates when I was quite young or something like that. And then really like I mean, just always looking and like more aware of your insides because they take biopsies that, it's like infinite blood tests and, stuff like that. I think it's super interesting that you're dealing with that you're seeing a lot of videos with vivisection. You gotta I guess I don't know if I want to watch that, but maybe send me some. And like, I mean, in my parapraxis essay, I wrote about Brackage's video of the act of seeing with one's own eyes, the video of an autopsy also, and I talked about how. So that's not vivisection, but it was this idea of the kind of the planes and folds of a body as something totally equivalent. Basically, like you go through these procedures that are kind of like leveling. I mean, that's also something with, again, the kind of phenomenology of illness is like, the doctors come in and, they're just, they've got that kind of like blank stare that they kind of have to not see you as a full person in order to effectively treat you or something. And like, you know, you're very aware that you're in a stack. Maybe this goes back to the I'm not a number, I'm a planet thing. I'm like a stack in a stack of charts. And you're like, wait, hold on, dude. Like, I'm like not a clipboard. I'm an artist or something. Um, and then the first question, I think I'm really interested, Bryce. I'm really interested in your reads of this works because I think that I'll answer this one fast because I know we're running out of time. Is the relationship between going on this kind of journey, this kind of ambulatory journey, and then having this kind of experience of dissolving in and out of your work. I think there is a super interesting parallel there, and that idea of a trajectory or a durational kind of drawing practice is kind of a bridge on those. Okay, I think Otto said we're done because it's pretty late in Zurich. Thank you guys for sticking around. Thank you for your question. The rest of the questions, you got to email me. I'm very easy to get a hold of. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. Wait, I can't hear you.
Do you understand? Do you hear me?
Yeah.
If you want to continue, you can. I think we would kind of wrap it up in for Zurich maybe, but you can maybe still stay in conversation if you want to.
Okay, I'll
Want
I'll
to
stay on the call
interrupt?
on the off chance for like 5 minutes or something. I got nothing going on.
Okay.
But bye Zurich. Bye
Thank you
Zurich.
so
Thank you so
much,
much.
and thank you so much for all the great questions and your great
Okay.
answers.
All right, Nicholas.
Yes, hello, Vijay. Now
Hey
maybe I
man.
was less nervous with the Zurich gone. Um, I've seen the show briefly after the opening, and I really enjoyed it a lot. A friend of mine sent me briefly after that your this YouTube video on this vernissage channel, and I remember that I kind of clicked it away because I was overwhelmed by the by how articulate you were at the time. It was like too much. I didn't want to overburden the experience of the show, and also now after having heard this great talk of yours, I'm really stunned by how reflected you are about what you are doing and how much sort of this analytical uh, stuff is going on. Obviously, that there's a lot of reading happening, and I was wondering how you. I mean, you were also mentioning blocked art students with empty studios. I was wondering how you can bridge that more like consumptive mode or consumptive practice to production because your works don't feel so burdened. Like they don't feel like they don't feel so textual, if that makes sense.
No, no, totally. I think you're exactly right. Yeah, I think I don't know why this happened. I mean, Otto's gone, but we had a number of conversations about the legacies of conceptualism and institutional critique really within the academy. I mean, it's like there's like Andrew Stock, the composer at U Chicago, posted this, so I'll credit him. But he was like, there's like a Joan Mitchell quote that's like to become a painter by like painting or making paintings, not by becoming an English major. And then Andrew posted that with like the caption that was like, "We're losing recipes" or something. I think there's really something to that. I mean, I used to make like 3 or 4 drawings a year, and then I got this show, and we were really confronted with, honestly, just practically speaking, it's like a big room, and obviously there's different ways you can kind of approach that. One of which is to do a really kind of pared down installation. We went for volume because it was working, and like, um, how do you square the kind of referentiality with the work that doesn't really wear that on its sleeve? The work used to be more citational and stuff. I think I really developed my writing practice, and now I feel more confident that I have a place to kind of scratch that itch. Um and the I used to have a lot of these conversations that were frustrating to me about like, oh yeah, like the work is cool, but it really comes to life when there's like a glossary or something. Whereas I wanted to make artworks, truthfully, that didn't need to be buttressed by a hefty exhibition text. That's not a jab against, people who do have that relationship with, say, research or textuality or something. It's just it doesn't satisfy me personally. So that did involve really being more credulous towards now relatively, old discourses about things like autonomy and stuff that obviously I think it's impossible to believe in now. But, I don't know, like it's kind of like, I mean, the other thing that I didn't end up talking about, this is like a really old Platonic concept of like a noble lie. It's like maybe it's useful to think things are a certain way if you're trying to do something kind of immediate. Like I really wanted to make a bunch of drawings. That's always been a goal of mine. Um, so, and entertaining these ideas of autonomy, not because you think that they're, true, art historically true, but because it gets you going, and that goes back to reading people like Agnes Martin, you know, I love the police, Agnes Martin, but I mean, it's super useful for students. I'm recommending that text to students because they've got too many cook syndrome, in their critiques where it's like, you know, so and so said this, and now I'm like re-questioning everything. And like, listen to Agnes Martin. She says only listen to yourself. I mean, it's like she's like this radical monad in the practice. And I mean, it really clarified why the work looks the way it does. Like, she's just like, what's true on your own. Inspiration comes from yourself, and art is made in solitude. I mean, it totally cuts against, their aspirations to, really socially implot their practice within, um, different, maybe forms of activism or something like that. But again, it gets things moving. So there is something about just kind of, I don't know, approaching this thing like you're a mechanic or something. I wanted to be an artist, which means you got to figure out how to make a bunch of work. I mean, also, I mean, the last thing I can say about that is like, I moved back to the suburbs, so you can't just go out to like Tribeca or the Lower East Side of Chelsea and like see a bunch of shows and stuff. There's good stuff in San Francisco, but I don't live there and stuff. So I started collecting monographs and stuff. So that changed a relationship with volume also, where like I really like it now. I'm pretty addicted to buying them because like you can really discern the whole arc of a practice and stuff, maybe more than even in an exhibition and stuff. So hopefully that starts to answer your question.
Yeah,
Very
thank you.
good.
That was very helpful. Thank you.
Any others, or should we call it? Coco had one. I don't know if Coco's still there. All right. Thanks, everyone. I'm calling it because I gotta go to the hospital.
Wait, hold on.
Oh, well,
Vijay,
okay, Rio. All right, Rio, you're good.
sorry.
Yeah. No, you're good.
Sorry, I was setting my mic up real quick. This is gonna be kind of messy. I think you mentioned earlier, that video is better thought of as a kind of music rather than its relationship to cinema. And I would love to kind of hear how you're going about, because I'm thinking about like the dog barking and using that to motivate cuts in something. I'm thinking about your relationship to music production and sampling, sample chopping, different methods of deploying editing schemes that have to do with what you might find in a digital audio workstation over perhaps like a regular editing suite, like the way that you would typically have like in Premiere or something. I'm just kind of curious to hear you kind of expand on what you're doing with treating video as a sort of, I don't know, it seems like somewhere between like field recording and its own production environment. Not that like perhaps you're aiming to make like songs perhaps, but like I would like to hear this kind of complicating blurred boundary that you're working with here.
No, for sure. I mean, it was something that, I wanted to get into in the talk, but it was already running, pretty long, like over an hour and stuff. I mean, the stuff we did a studio visit on, I ended up making my first show at Klima after, making that album with Coco. And like, when I came back to video, it's like the videos were like 3 minutes long, and a lot of them were like perfect loops, and at times I was actually editing them in Ableton. So it was, about bringing back that sensibility. But, you know, now again, like returning, I read the Video Theories reader that just came out. It's got a super boring cover, so I think it gets overlooked, but it's a really good reader. And like I think that also something has been really flattened out with the digital, because now it is, all just a file, you know, and that's brought, cinema is shot on digital video and videos are shot on video, digital video, and then music is digital, you know what I mean? So there's been a kind of flattening, and things get a little jumbled in as much as I am interested in the fact that like there's a kind of like unilateral textuality now to digital media. I think that's cool too. But these older discourses about yeah, Bill Viola talking about the broadcast as as like a constant drone that people can enter into at any time. And the sound of one line scanning. So the idea that, it's kind of moving at this very fast rate, but it is ultimately just a frequency. And then yeah, stuff like Flusser saying that like these are actually parallel traditions, reflected light versus backlit light is like, I don't know, it's like, what is it? There's a gulf between those and stuff. I think that this is really something that can be salvaged when, you're still invested again in kind of anachronistic modernist ideas of medium specificity, when you haven't done away with that. Again, there's been this kind of equivalence through textuality now, but if you're gonna teach it, and you want models for yourself, I think this idea of, them on separate tracks is super useful and stuff. But then, I am working with digital media. I'm working on the computer, and as well as I do, that something that it really allows for is like total flexibility between digital video objects and just, dropping that into Ableton, porting that out, moving it back into Premiere. There's like a real like kind of fluidity and stuff. And then, I mean, it was super funny, having this kind of, now it's really this volley between drawing and video. And I think this is probably the only show where like I've kind of like shook my like I don't know, like musician envy, where I'm like I like love visual art now, And but before it was, between video and music. And even when I made music, I was like, I feel like I was sampling in a way where I was sampling from a lot of videos, so there was this kind of like ghost visual element of it that was kind of implied. And then now there's this kind of like ghost musical element. Even I would say definitely in the drawings as well as um, the videos that obviously a lot of them do have sound drones and stuff. I spent way less time scoring this show than any previous show. Um, I don't know. I'm not like synesthetic art though, you know what I mean? It's just like it's like multiple things that I like to do. Um, Coco says I used to describe the arrangement in Ableton as drawings. I don't remember saying that, but it sounds true. I mean, like, the timeline for Good Attack, it's this like 6-minute video, and then at the end, you settle on the sign. I used to describe that as the ground falling out, and then the letters on the sign start to rearrange. So I was like, oh, like the ground can fall out again. And that was something interesting. But I used to describe the timeline as trying to have a time. I was very excited by a timeline that looked like a Barnett Newman painting and stuff, like one color and then single line and then another line. So, you know, I don't know. It's just like how we think or something. Um, Anyone else?
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Rio. Oh yeah, I mean, one more thing I can say about that. I said this in the video also is like, so just real quick is like, the idea that video has a ton of is really stop and start. There's tons of software bottlenecks. I really think that it's like, I mean, that's why I don't do stop motion or really just less and less animation overall. It's because it kind of feels very masochistic, and I don't want extra suffering, So I really like to write because, you're like, you can never like reach a moment where like in writing where it's just like a bunch of busy work and you like put on a podcast or something and just like muscle through it. Like that literally never happens with writing. Like you have to sit there and think with it. And that's why, I love it so much. I would say drawing is more similar to that. So trying to figure out video workflows that still feel, satisfying, but aren't super production intensive. I think like, you know, people I can move probably faster with sound, and also just practically speaking, like, you know, it's less processor intensive and stuff like that. So it has this relationship about, I guess, like getting in the flow as well. All right, should we call it last call? All right. Nice to see everyone. I think everyone still in this room is a fucking rider. So peace. Thanks for coming. See you all next time. Bye, Coco. Bye, Mara.